Good afternoon and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Before we get started, a few quick reminders as always. Anyone who has registered for today's program will be receiving a copy by early next week. And if you have any questions, be sure to enter them into the Q&A bar at the lower right-hand side of your interface. Today, we welcome Christian Hansen, partner and cybersecurity consultant from Moss Adams. Christian, I know you have a lot to get to today, so I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we wanted to talk about the state of cybersecurity right now. There's a lot of things going on, and a lot of things we can do about what's going on, and wanted to take some time to talk through those things. First, this is a bit of a look backwards. Some of these things happened in 2023, some in 2022. But there are some pretty significant breaches, cybersecurity breaches that happened over the past couple of years. And I wanted to highlight a few because they provide a bit of a view into what are the bad guys doing, and we'll talk about that in some more detail, and then what can we do about them. Top left corner, SolarWinds. Many of you may not be as familiar with this one. SolarWinds is a technology vendor, so they provide a lot of IT IT tools and solutions. And the breach pattern was actually pretty interesting here. So I wanted to talk about that for a moment. So the bad guys were able to hack into a development pipeline for SolarWinds. So this wasn't one of the main systems at SolarWinds, and candidly, SolarWinds was not really the target here. It's all of SolarWinds customers, and that'll make more sense in a minute. So they broke into a development pipeline at SolarWinds, and then they sat around there for about a month, and then they ran a test where they put some of their own software code updates, nothing malicious, just to test it out. You know, can this get through? Does this go through the process and end up getting into the main software tool? And it did. So then a couple months later, they deployed their payload. They added some malicious software and effectively opened a back door into every SolarWinds customer that was using that product. So then when the customers that were using that product ran a software update, every single one that ran that software update now had this open back door. And not only were there open back doors, but the threat actors needed to know where those were, and so the system would also beacon out. It was sending basically a signal, almost like a lighthouse, saying, "Hey, here's a place you can come and get me." The effects of this have been pretty far-reaching and damaging. Opened a lot of backdoors to United States federal government entities, some of the biggest corporations in the world. There's been a lot of work that's had to go through to then kind of close the doors and get rid of the problem. This created kind of a sea change in the cybersecurity world, in that with SolarWinds being a publicly traded company, the Security and Exchange Commission got involved. Eventually, their chief information security officer has now been, there's a lawsuit pending and all sorts of nasty things. And so the litigation that's coming it's really a sea change moment, because that's really the first time the SEC has targeted a security officer by name. Typically, they're after CFOs and CEOs at these companies, but chief information security officers are now on that list of targets. And so this was a pretty big deal, as far as how did it change how security officers think about themselves and their jobs, what holes were opened across the world, and what could bad guys do with that. Both T-Mobile and AT&T announced breaches. I think these were both last year. T-Mobile's that they announced was the 8th or 9th time that they've been hacked since 2018. So they are just constantly being breached. Whether that's constant new breaches, there could also be what we would call an APT, an advanced persistent threat. So basically someone is in there so deep and they can't get them out. AT&T originally had announced they had 73 million customer records that were stolen. I think they revised that down to 57. I'm going to skip United Healthcare. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Caesar's Palace and MGM, both of them had ransomware events last year. Caesars decided to pay the ransom. I believe the original ransom was about $30 million demand. They negotiated down to half of that to 15 million. MGM did not pay the ransom. Um, and they announced that the estimated total cost of the breach was going to reach $100 million. So that's lost revenue, recovery efforts, and all those sorts of things. I knew of some people that were at MGM when that happened. Hotel doors could not be opened because those are connected to the system. The casino floor is shut down because those are connected to the system. So it was really damaging. Microsoft, I don't remember why I initially added them to the list, but most recently, it was announced that Chinese hackers had breached the email of the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and I believe the ambassador to China. Read their emails right before they had a meeting with their counterparts, their Chinese counterparts. That was not good. OpenAI I put on there because AI is kind of the new darling of the tech world and there's a lot of buzz around it. They had a very small breach. About 1% of paying customers' data was breached, and it wasn't the AI history, it was just, payment information, account information. Move It there at the bottom. Move It was another IT-based thing. This is a tool that's used to help move files around. This was another colossal IT security breach as far as the scope. And again, Move It itself was not the target, but everyone that used it. And I know people personally had their banking information had been stolen because of this breach. Number of items. I'm going to go back up to United Healthcare. So this was earlier this year. One of United Healthcare's subsidiaries, maybe not subsidiaries, but one of the business units, Change Healthcare, was hacked. Change Healthcare has a system that provides billing. It's a billing system on the back end for a huge percentage of doctors' offices and hospitals and things like that. I think the United Healthcare CEO in front of Congress said that the vast majority of Americans had some data breached in that. The total cost of that breach, he said, would reach probably like 1.6 billion. They ended up paying ransom twice. So they paid ransom the first time to get it unlocked, and then I think it was maybe 2 months later, another ransomware group came out and said, "Oh, by the way, we have 4 terabytes of your data. If you don't pay us $22 million, we're going to start releasing that publicly." They did not pay it. And then a couple weeks later, some data started leaking. And then all of a sudden, the data stopped leaking. So they ended up paying ransom twice. Last but not least, down in our bottom right-hand corner, I just have water. So November of last year, the FBI came out and said that fewer than 10, so probably 9, municipal water districts had been hacked. It seemed like it was likely Russian threat actors. All of those, from what I read, that had been breached were running the same some hardware controller devices that were made by an Israeli company, and those devices were not secured. This was probably a bit of political motivation because of the United States' involvement with Israel. And then just this morning, I saw an article that the EPA was coming out warning everyone again that both Chinese and Russian, either sanctioned or silently sanctioned groups, continue to breach the United States water districts and water systems. I read an article about a water district in the Philadelphia area. I don't remember exactly where. And they had they were no longer able to operate some pressurization pumps that were used to pressurize some folks that were farther out from the water, the main plant. And that they just had to send somebody in at 3 in the morning, excuse me, 3 in the morning to turn on the pressurization pumps, which in and of itself is not that interesting. But then you have to start thinking about what's the next step that the threat actors will take. Will they dechlorinate all of our water so now everyone has E. coli, or will they over chlorinate all of our water and poison everybody? Um, it could also be sort of Cold War era tactics where we can hold this over your head and use it as a kind of implicit threat. So these are all things that are happening all the time. My Google News is probably just attuned to what I like to read, and so it tells me about breaches all the time. These are just some of the same things that we just talked through here, so you can see the numbers. Um, the Move It breach, I forgot to add, in January, they estimated the total cost across the market from everybody that was impacted could reach $10 billion. So these are big deals, these are big problems, and they happen all the time, and they happen to kind of a variety of anybody. AT&T and T-Mobile are very different than casinos, are very different than tech vendors, are very different than hospital networks. um, and nobody's really immune. So everybody is hackable. These are some breach statistics from Verizon's data breach investigation report. They publish this every year. This is data from the 2023 report, so it's reflective of 2022. 2024 report that reflects 2023 was released just a couple weeks ago, so I haven't necessarily updated it. To be honest, a lot of the data is pretty consistent and has been for a number of years. The vast majority of breaches involve external people. Most of them involve humans. A lot of them involve stolen credentials, so username and passwords. This bottom one, ransomware, this has actually increased. This last year of 2023, the combination of ransomware and straight just extortion, which are kind of the same idea, is about a 32% of all breaches. The line's been kind of wavy over the years. So in 2022, it was up in the low 30s again. Last year, 2021, it was a little bit higher. 2022 is a little lower. 2023, it's coming back up. But again, you can see the vast majority of this are external actors, some internal, some use a little mix of both. The partner at the bottom is going to be like your outsourced IT provider. So what this shows is it's very unlikely that they are going to be a source of a security breach of your systems. So not only are the external actors, but the vast majority of them are actually organized crime units, and most of them are financially motivated. So these are just bad guys that have a job, and their job is to steal money from other people. You can see at the bottom on that left-hand column, very few of them are nation state or state affiliated actors, and very few are actual espionage, which holds pretty true. We tend to hear about the ones that are like that because they generate a lot more buzz, and there's some more mandatory reporting requirements in some cases. But when the data is really dug into, again, it's fairly consistent. These are outside people, organized crime looking for money, which is really why ransomware has allowed that to continue to rise over the years, a percentage of breaches. You can think of ransomware as just the payload. So you've been hacked. The bad guys want to monetize the hack. Ransomware is a way that you can monetize any hack. 11 years ago, this is a fairly well-known breach in the cyber world. 11 years ago, Target, the retailer, got hacked. My credit card was stolen in that hack. And retailers were a big target because credit cards were valuable. You could make money, you could use them, you could sell them. Retailers have locked that down pretty tightly. The payment card industry, data security standards, there's a PCI is the acronym for it. But they have their own security standards for how credit card data has to be secured. And there have been a lot of technological advances to protect that data. So retail theft of credit cards is actually pretty low now. The Target breach was interesting because the bad guys came in through the HVAC system, not like Tom Cruise crawling through the ductwork, but they hacked into the remote control system for the HVAC system when we're able to get from that down to the credit card network where the swipes happen at the kiosk or at the registers. That's how they were able to steal all the credit cards. But today, on the black market, on the dark web, credit card's worth like $1. If you get a full credit card, it's only worth about $1. Um, I've seen personally, in the past, since the Target breach, when a credit card number's been stolen, it's actually pretty easy on the relative scale to like reverse the charges and shut the card down and get a new card issued. And so you don't get very far with them. And the market economy in the dark web shows that because the value of a credit card is about $1. The value of a stolen healthcare record, I've read a couple different numbers, and I'm not in the market to buy those things, so I don't really know. But it's about $30, I believe, for a full stolen electronic medical record. So now you can start seeing why our hospitals getting hacked all the time right now. Well, their data is valuable, and it's being sold. Usually the people that steal the data are not the people that use the data. There's a whole economy around it. And so the data gets stolen and sold and then used. And why a medical record? Well, because things like fentanyl have a very high street value. So if I could steal a medical record and get fake prescriptions issued, I now have a sellable something I can sell. Um, how do we get breached? Stolen credentials is a big one. Ransomware is a fairly big one, and these are not necessarily happening in isolation. So the Change Healthcare hack that I was talking about earlier, the United Healthcare thing, it was a combination of two of these things. One, they had a remote access point that was unpatched, so that's the exploiting a vulnerability there at the bottom. Two, they had stolen username and password, so the one at the top, and then they did not have multi-factor authentication turned on, which would have made the stolen credentials less usable. And in the cybersecurity world, barely, those are kind of like eat your vegetables and get a good night's sleep and brush your teeth every day. Patch your systems, use multi-factor authentication, have good usernames and passwords. So it was relative on in some sense relatively easily preventable. This is some data on ransomware. So this shows that there's some interesting trends going on. Over the years, the size of the ransoms being asked for is shrinking. The assumption that most people have made and that the data seems to prove out is the ransoms are shrinking because the size of the companies being breached are shrinking. In Verizon's 2024 report, they showed that the median ransom was about 1.3% of revenue, which again tends to hold pretty constant. So the bad guys do their homework. They know how much money you make or something close to it. And they know how much to ask for. They know how much they think they can get from you. And that's what they're going to ask for. So as the ransoms shrink, that's representing that the size of the companies being breached continues to shrink. Again, like I don't have to hack into Target to steal a credit card to make my hack make money for me anymore. I can hack anybody and lock them out of their systems. That's what ransomware is, right? I encrypt all of your data and I hold the decryption keys or whatever I do. There's a few ways you can kind of lock people out, but I'm going to lock you out of your own systems. Your choices are to either shut everything down that you have and start back over from scratch, or pay me. And oftentimes they're targeting a payout amount that's going to be less than the cost of you recovering on your own. Um, Unsurprisingly, government people say don't pay because you just encourage the behavior. Like United Healthcare, you become what they call a soft target. So I know you paid once, you'll probably pay again. But it's a tough decision. Do you just want to pay and get it over with, or do you want to try to recover? Both of them are painful. I've spoken to numerous folks who decided not to pay and just burned their systems down and started over from scratch, and it's still kind of PTSD type of an issue in the back of their mind. It still haunts them a little bit. And we've talked to people that have paid, and it still haunts them that they had to pay. So there's not a great outcome either way. So prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what does all of this mean? Um, Ransomware gets a lot of attention. This says 24%. Last year was 32% of breaches. But the thing to always keep in mind is you've already been hacked before ransomware gets deployed. And the average time for the bad guys to sit on your network before they deploy something is about 3 months. So not only have you been breached, but you've been breached and they've been sitting around for maybe 3 months. I've seen some shorter, some less. That's the average. Um, and so there's things you can do to help prevent that. So there there's a few things that kind of ring true constantly. One, train your people. People are a threat. People are a weak point. Um, Train the people. Don't click on that email, right? Like we've all had those emails come through with that link in it, and the the quality of those things has increased over time. They're no longer the really badly, poor grammar asking for you to go to Walmart and buy $2,000 in gift cards types of things. That doesn't happen that frequently anymore. So having your people be trained and capable is really important. Keep your access controls really tight. Um, Usernames and passwords, don't share them. Have good ways to manage them. When you deploy new systems, change the default usernames and passwords. I think almost all of those water districts I talked about earlier, I don't think they had changed default usernames and passwords. So you have something that's public facing. It's like, you know, you might have closed your door, but everyone has a key to the lock. Well, what's the point of having a lock if everyone has a key? There's no point. Patch your systems, internal and external. This is a hard one sometimes because security patches can cause operational disruptions. But again, like if you do this, you're going to be mitigating a lot of opportunity. And then monitor what's going on your network. Because again, if you've been hacked and breached, there's usually about 3 months before they do something. So if you can catch them in that 3 month window, you can still prevent things from happening. All of those things take time and effort and focus. So I understand that there's always kind of this balance of risk versus reward, but these are some kind of rudimentary things that you can do to keep yourself safe. As far as patching your systems, this is another thing that I should mention. In 2023, the number of hacks, the number of breaches that involved the use of a technical exploit, so like an unpatched system, almost tripled. So there's a huge uptick in the use of exploiting technical vulnerabilities on systems. I don't know if that'll continue. I don't know if that's all related to like MOVEit and SolarWinds, or if that's a general trend that we'll see. But again, rolling your patches out and just maintaining that will solve those issues. So what does all that mean? Um, with more problems, we have more regulations. Um, the FTC has their safeguard rule. This came out in December 2022 that specifically applies to auto dealerships. Um, quite frankly, it mirrors a lot of other cybersecurity requirements and other frameworks. If we were to put up a Venn diagram of all the cyber frameworks, there's a massive amount of overlap. Good cybersecurity practice is good cybersecurity practice, whether you're at home or at work, whether you're a defense contractor or a car dealership. Using multi-factor authentication and patching your systems and backing up your data is good to do. It doesn't matter. Um, the SEC has new reporting rules for cybersecurity risk management incident response. A lot of that harkens back to SolarWinds and a couple other large breaches. CMMC, this is a Department of Defense rule. The FCC has rolled out cybersecurity requirements for broadband networks, so your telephone and internet providers. The Department of Energy has cybersecurity baselines for electric distribution systems. It goes on and on and on and on. There are regulations probably covering almost every industry, but again, they all kind of say the same things. So good cybersecurity practices are good cybersecurity practices. Be cognizant that there is regulatory risk, that non-compliance provides its own risk. And so knowing and being familiar with those safeguard rules, or having someone that is and can say, yeah, we're covered, and probably not just we're covered because we went and bought a software tool and they promised us that we'd be covered, but check on it. Just make sure that you're staying in compliance, because sometimes requirements change, systems change, people change. All of those things can push you to a non-compliant state. I know we're close on time. This is just some more data. You'll see this later if you want to look at it on what the SEC did with SolarWinds. It gives some more information there. It's FTC 16 CFR Part 314 that applies to car dealerships specifically. This bullet point list kind of just highlights the general ideas. You need to have governance. So someone needs to be in charge, and not only does someone need to be in charge of the cybersecurity things, they need to report that up to your board, your ownership, however you're structured, but who is ultimately in charge of everything? They need to be aware of what's going on. Your cyber plan should be based on a risk assessment. So risk assessment here is really like, you have inherent risk, like here are things that just could happen that are bad. You have controls that you've done to mitigate those risks. That gives you a residual risk score. And at that point, management needs to say, are we comfortable with our risk? Do we need more controls? Do we want to stop doing something that creates risk? Do we want to buy more insurance? Or are we just going to accept it? All of those are our answers. There's some other additional bullet points of things that your cybersecurity program should include. Those are all specified in that FTC rule. So hopefully this has been helpful and educational. I think I'm at time, if I'm watching the clock correctly. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them now. If you have questions later, I'm happy to answer them later. Either way, I could be here as a resource just to kind of help. If you need to be pointed in the right direction, I'm more than happy to do that. So thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
Christian, thanks so much for joining us today. This was some really helpful and kind of scary information, but it's always good to be on top of it all. Again, you will all be receiving a copy of this webinar by early next week. To those on the line, join us back here for a special session on Monday, June 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, as Cox Automotive discusses innovations to winning today's car buyers. For more information about AIADA, visit aiada.org. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.